Welcome to the second day of this year's safety event. It's early hours, but Stephan from Raed slacklines declared himself available for a presentation on understanding 3 sigma without studying math, apparently. So excited for this talk. It's all yours, Stephan.
Thanks for introducing. Hello, everybody. Today's topic is understanding 3 sigma, an issue that was talked about in the Slack chat and also in Ryan's video for some times now. I try to explain in a practical way, so you don't have to study math, you don't have to know any kind of formulas or something like this, how 3 sigma works. And I'd like to hand to you a practical approach, how to use it and how to apply it. And right in the way, I will try to debunk the super good enough that we heard quite some oftentimes by now, and explain why it's not the right approach, in my opinion, to strength of safety critical gear. I'm Stephan, founder of Raed slacklines. I don't even highline, let alone bounce. So let's do this. Many of us, including me, did the same mistake during the last years. Many of us showed break tests, and we showed the results in videos on YouTube, on Facebook, and in Slack chat, and claimed gear to be still strong enough after being used for quite some long time, because we found some results and we showed this is the lowest result we could found, and we were kind of satisfied by this approach. So I'm guilty of this. This is the same that Ryan is doing in his How Not to Highline YouTube channel for years now. Many of us do this. Many of us did this during the last years. So this was kind of a common approach to show how strong highline gear is, even after some kind of heavy use. So let's dive into what's wrong with this and how we can do better. This is an ideal webbing sample that we break test. We have 100 samples of this webbing, and we break tested 100 times. And every single result is a breaking strength of 28.5 kilonewtons. There's no result right from this. There's no result left from this. So in an ideal world with ideal webbings, this webbing breaks all the time at the exact same force. But of course, this is not an ideal world we're living in. So the reality looks a bit more like this. So what I did here is I took an imaginary webbing sample, 100 samples of this webbing, and broke it. And what we usually find is some kind of a curve. We find that we have many of the webbing samples breaking at about 28.5 kilonewtons, about 1/3 of these samples. And we have a curve to the right, and we have a curve to the left that gets flatter the more we get in the distance of the 28.5 kilonewtons. The less the samples break, the farther they get away from this. So we have like 20% breaking half a kilonewton stronger or weaker than our central findings, and we have less and less samples breaking stronger, and we have less and less samples breaking weaker than this. In total, we still have 100 samples broken, and what we can see here, this makes a nice curve. And there's many approaches on how to state the strength of this sample, right? So one approach could be, maybe let's take the average value of all these samples. The problem with average is, as you can see in these funny paintings, if you have an average water depth of a riverbed and you try to walk across it, and maybe the average water depth is 3 feet. This means you can have a broad part of the river being 1 foot deep, and one very narrow section of the river like 10 feet deep. So you can still drown in this river. So obviously the average depth of the river is not the perfect value. The same goes for this guy here. He is sleeping with his head in the oven and with his feet in the freezer. So on average, he has a perfect temperature, but obviously the average value does not suit his well-being, right? So the average might not be the perfect value for seeing how strong something in reality is. The average of the breaking strength of this sample is 28.48 kilonewtons. So as expected, where we have the most samples, the average is also found here. So, but what we can see is obviously we have results that are stronger and we have results that are weaker, that are not covered by showing the average, the mean value of this. So maybe we take the lowest value, like we did in many of our videos before, right? So what I'm doing now is I take another sample. This time I just break 3 samples of this very same webbing. And maybe by this little probe, I get a result of one breaking at 29 kilonewtons, another one breaking at 28 kilonewtons, and another one breaking at 27.5 kilonewtons. This appears to me like a realistical sample of such webbing. And the average value still is of these 3 values, the average is still at 28.1 kilonewtons. But obviously, from this little probe, we're missing something, right? We are missing all the samples that we know appear when we test 100 samples. We know there's missing this small part. We are missing these ones, and we are also missing the stronger ones. So obviously, when we are taking 3 samples of a probe, we are missing all of these. But what can we do for this? This is what Sigma is made for. Sigma introduces us a statistical method to show how we can find all of these by still only having 3 probes or 4 probes or 5 probes of a break test. So what does Sigma do? It puts some kind of the curve that I introduced before onto these values, and it shows us how much variance there is in these values. And 1 sigma means that we have about 1/3 of the width of the whole probe within this window. So what we will find within the 1 sigma variance is the results that are at maybe 29, maybe 29.5 kilonewtons, and the results below the 28.5, maybe at 28 or maybe at 27.5 kilonewtons. So this window is where 1 sigma of a variance happens in our test results when we test 100 samples of this webbing. Then we have the broader variance of 2 sigma, and we will find even more values of this. We will find the values up to 30 kilonewtons and maybe down to 27 kilonewtons. And if we apply even a broader variance of 3 sigma, we will also find the values of 26.5 kilonewtons and even the values of 30.5 kilonewtons. So what does this curve show? This curve shows us that about 68% of all values that we find in the sample lie within this kind of the curve. This means that about 32% of all values are not shown within this part of the curve, which also applies to the values we have here. If we add them, we will see, okay, this is like 68% of the values over here. and 32% are missing in total below and on top of them. And we can make these sigma parts even smaller. We can go to 2.1%, or we can even go down to 0.1%. So what this shows is that if we have the variance of 3 sigma, only 0.15% are stronger than what we see in 3 sigma, and only 0.15% are weaker than what we see within this 3 sigma curve. So this means that we can have a 99.7% chance when we cover this area from minus 3 sigma to plus 3 sigma, we have a 99.7% chance of covering all possible results by only having a 3 sample study. So how is this applied? One more point. Obviously, sigma can be, the curve sigma applies to can be kind of narrow. So maybe we have many probes that come in at the very same result, and very few that are weaker or stronger. Or we have a different curve. This happens if we have obviously more samples that are weaker, shown here in this blue curve, or more samples that are stronger than our average value. So, of course, when we have such a curve, if we have many values in our probes that come around the average value, probably our sigma is much narrower. So we can calculate that the values that are below and higher than the average value are closer to the center value. And if we see that we have a broader variance, obviously this means that there can be much stronger or much weaker results. I will come back to this a bit later. So what is the 3 sigma value of the imaginary webbing that I showed above in these 100 samples? For this, I calculated the mean value, the average value. The average value I showed you above is 28.48 kilonewtons. And I calculated the 1 sigma. 1 sigma is at about 0.8-ish kilonewtons that we have as the 1 sigma variance left and right from the mean value. What 3 sigma does is it subtracts the sigma value 3 times from the mean value. So in the end, this shows us that the 3 sigma value is at about 26.1 kilonewtons. And if we look at these values up here, this makes pretty good sense, right? Because we see, okay, our lowest value is at 26.5 kilonewtons. There's only 2 results out of 100 that come out at 26.5. And we have this broad curve over here with a mean value of about 28.5. And we see there's hardly any results possible below this, and there's hardly any results possible above this. So this value calculated by this 3 sigma rule makes pretty much sense. And so now we do the exact same for our 3 samples that I showed above. We have this 1 sample at 27.5 kilonewtons, we have 1 sample at 28 kilonewtons, and we have 1 sample at 29 kilonewtons. And again, I calculated the mean value, 28.2 kilonewtons, and I applied the formula of calculating sigma. Sigma is 0.8 kilonewtons. And again, I subtracted the 3 times mean value, the 3 times sigma value from the mean value, and I get as a result 25.9 kilonewtons, which is pretty close to the 26.1 kilonewtons we had here, right? So what this shows is some kind of magic. We can calculate 3 sigma statistical value of the strength of the webbing by just having 3 samples broken and applying some mathematical magic to it. So this value is pretty close, and it shows this might work pretty well. So what I did for you for the future is I created Google spreadsheet. So you can calculate your own 3 sigma values on all your test results on all your test results in the future. There's the short link for this here, this bit.ly link, and I also put in the long link. This is exactly the same, so I don't fool you to go anywhere. This link goes to exactly this URL, and I'm going to show you how this is done. This is the spreadsheet that is created. It's publicly available, and you can only edit the lightly blue fields in here. And we have 3 calculations. We have 1 calculation for 3 results. We have 1 calculation for 4 results, and we have 1 calculation for 5 results. You can simply enter any kind of value into here. Let's say we have 27 kilonewtons as the first value, 27.5 kilonewtons as the second value, and 29 kilonewtons as the third value. And it calculates the mean for us, it calculates 1 sigma for us, and it subtracts the 3 sigma from the mean, and we get a result of 24.7 kilonewtons as a 3 sigma value for these results from strength test. You can also add in 4 values or 5 values. It's easier to have this in 3 separate calculations. So this spreadsheet is publicly available for you guys. Have fun with it and try this. So how does this apply to real world data? What I did is Ryan had a video some weeks ago published in Slack chat where he tested perma-rig that was from Raed, I think. And so these values were published below the video, and I took these values and put them into the table I just showed you. And this is what happened. If you take the backup that had values from 70.32 kilonewtons, 17.34 kilonewtons, and 20.64 kilonewtons, you get, if you only take these 3 values, you get a 3 sigma strength that's left in this webbing from about 12.7 kilonewtons. So if you have webbings breaking at 17, 20 kilonewtons, this obviously means that there is only 12 kilonewtons of strength in it, and you have a probability of some kind of chance that you break it at about 12.7 or 13-ish kilonewtons. So the claim that was made below this video that these values were still super good enough for a 2-year-old webbing might not stand to this number. The same goes for the main webbing. The main webbing had 5 test results. I put all of them into the 5 test results part of the spreadsheet, 20.24, 17.82, and so on. And it calculated again, it's calculated mean 19.45 kilonewtons. It created the sigma of 1.2 from these values, and it calculated the 3 sigma strength of it, which is only 15.77 kilonewtons from these values. So even for the main line, which looked kind of still strong with values at about 20, 17, 18, 20, 20 kilonewtons, but the variance of these values mean that there's a high probability, a high chance of also having much stronger and also having much weaker values in the end. So what the table did is it calculated a minimum strength of only 15.77 kilonewtons, which is kind of different than the values we see up here. But you still have a chance of finding these lower values. The more tests you will do on this webbing, the higher the chances that you also find much weaker, because we also see one that's at only 17.8 kilonewtons here, right? And then I did the same again for the backup webbing, but but this time I included the weakest value in this. And Ryan posted something about, yeah, we don't know what this weakest value meant, but let's be honest, we cannot just exclude this value from our world. We see it's there, right? So we kind of have to include it into our calculations, because we have seen that at least one part of the webbing failed at only 13.37 kilonewtons. We have seen this with our own eyes. We cannot just exclude this from the results. So again, for results put into the table, calculating mean, calculating 1 sigma. Obviously, 1 sigma is much higher here because we have a way higher variance in these values. And when we start calculating this, what we find is that the backup webbing that was used there only had a strength left of about 8.5, 8.6 kilonewtons. And now we can ask ourselves, would we want to whip on a backup webbing that has only about 8.6, maybe 9 kilonewtons of strength left in it? I would personally come to the conclusion for myself, I wouldn't want to, because I'm not 100% certain that this would save my ass. So this is probably the best time to change this webbing, because there's not much life in it, right? So yeah, this was it for this part from myself. I hope I could make it a bit of some kind of understandable what 3 sigma does, how you can calculate it. I hope you can make use of the spreadsheet that is on Google Spreadsheets right now. Thanks for listening, and stay safe and keep the balance.
Thank you, Stephan, for the very informative talk about 3 sigma. Are there any questions or comments? When he posted that video, I made the same calculations and also put it in a Facebook comment underneath. Yeah. Yes, it's super sensible to do these calculations, especially if you've... Oh, hello, Augustine. Especially if you have new webbing and want to sort of make sure that the production quality is good, and that you sell it in a way that the people get a reliable number. I'm not sure how, maybe Walter, you can chime in with your experience, how accurate or how reliable the 3 sigma method is if we're looking at used webbings, because if you look at like naturally aged webbing, you get great variance just from like which individual piece of the webbing do I test? Do I test the one that was in the weblock the whole time? Do I test the one where everyone's standing up and falling into the leash? Or do I take a piece that's been on the other side where almost never anyone walked on? So for this specific video or set of data you picked, I'm not entirely convinced that the 8 kilonewton that we calculate is sort of representative, in the same way that maybe a 24 kilonewton for a new webbing as an MBS is a valuable piece of information to have. What do you think, Walter, when you test used stuff? What do you see with the variance and the deviations?
Difficult question. The problem are the what is called Ausreißer in English?
Variance, the deviances.
The variance to the top, like I told yesterday with the orange.
Yes, yeah.
If you, for me personally, in all my research, I tried to find the black swan, which is weaker than everything else, where systems can fail. I'm not interested in the top end variance, not at all. So for me, if you have 100 tests with 10 kilonewton and one single test with, let's say, 5 kilonewton where things can fail, maybe the MBS is still high, but people can fall off with this one single thing. That's why I cannot really say clear what I would prefer in this connex. I would prefer to exclude somehow the one single failure which is too weak, the one single sample that is too weak.
Yeah.
You would want to exclude this from the calculations.
Pardon me?
You would want to exclude this from the calculations.
Yes. Yeah, I want to find it.
No, I think, Stephan, you're misunderstanding maybe. Walter is not interested in having like an accurate MBS calculation, but he wants to make sure that you find that one, or in this case, the one that was like 13, that was much, much lower than the rest. This is the one you need to find. The rest is not interesting because it doesn't lead to any accidents, right?
Yeah. Maybe let me show you the one slide again, where this was done. This was done. We can see that there's this one value at 13.37 kilonewtons, right? And if we exclude this value and we only take the 17.32, 17.34, and 20.64, I just added these values up here and calculated 3 sigma. Then 3 sigma is at about 12.7 kilonewtons. And this is quite coincidentally to the 13.37 kilonewtons that Ryan also found. So what I see here is some kind of a correlation. If we exclude this lowest value, that is the highest deviance, we can still calculate from the other values a value that's really close to this lowest value that he accidentally found. So even if he did not find this value, and if he only found the stronger values and he would have put them into a 3 sigma calculation, he would still have found a minimum breaking strength of 12.7, which is really close to the accidental sample that he found.
Yeah.
So I still believe that the method itself works pretty well.
Yes, absolutely. And I mean, we can see it's what the single sigma is like 1.8. So if we go from 17 average down to 13, it would be, well, 1 in 20, 1 in 30. That should break at around that 13.5 kilonewton.
Yes.
Yeah.
So by chance, he found this weakest one by chance because he probed more samples than usual, more than the usual 2 or 3 samples that he did. But as we can see, there will be a talk afterwards from me about the knots that we tested at Raed. And it's the same procedure here. If you test like 2 or 3 knots, you will probably find 2 or 3 pretty strong knots in webbing. But as soon as you start testing like 40, 50, 60 knots in webbing, you will find weaker samples. So the question that we have to ask ourselves is, do we want to gamble and say, okay, if we take like 50 backup faults, is it fine for us that only 20% work, or only 60%, or only 70% fine for us? And are we accepting the risk of maybe 20% of our backups failing because the knot is too weak? So for myself, I would say, no, I wouldn't like to take this chance. So I believe this method works pretty well.
Yes. But on the other hand, if you look at the 3 sigma and you say, let's have, I don't know, 1,000 meter long slackline, just as like an example, and break this down into 1 meter pieces that we can test. So we test, I don't know, 10 pieces of 1 meter, and then we calculate like a 3 sigma of, I don't know, 22 kilonewton, like an MBS. But now we try to do it the other way around. So we say, okay, we have 1,000 samples long slackline. How many of those are now below 15 kilonewton? And then maybe we find like there's 2 1 meter sections that are below 15 kilonewtons, according to our calculation. But then when there's some wind and the line goes up to 17, 18, nothing happens. So yes, the MBS is a really strong tool, but if you go all the way down to the super extremes on the outside, you won't find them. There is no 1 in a million meters of slackline webbing that breaks at like a half a kilonewton, right? Or even, let's say, if there were, you would probably see it from a, I don't know, webbing manufacturing defect or something, right?
Yeah, but this is why we only take 3 sigma and not 6 sigma, for example.
But if you say, okay, I do 3 tests on my 20-kilometer batch of webbing that you buy as a supplier, you don't try to look for those 2 or 3 meter sections that you have to sort out because they're really not strong at all, right?
In my experience, this is what I showed in another slide. Give me a second. In my experience, the webbing, if it's new, rather falls into this kind of curve. We have a very narrow margin, very narrow variance, and most of the values from our brand new samples that we test have like 0.2 in max variance from the average value. But as soon as we test used gear, or as soon as we test knots or something like this, the variance gets a lot broader and broader depending on what we test. So I think we cannot compare used gear or knots to brand new gear. This is like, in my experience, 2 completely different kind of calculations. Because new gear, if we test webbing, if we test weblocks, if we test the leashes, the leash rings, whatever, we have like really narrow width of the results. And in used gear, and as soon as we apply gear to some kind of other gear, like webbing in a knot, it gets way broader.
I think this is very important. The question to me before, and my answer was what I know from my used samples. The 3 sigma is very good working in in testing for standardization.
Once again, I didn't hear you.
The 3 sigma, the MBS as we use, is very good working in new samples for standardization. So for standardization, I would say let's keep it, because it also helps to find weak points in the testing facility. So like when I made a mistake to use Dynama, to use a preloaded Dynama accidentally. That helped me. And for used, to find weak points in used, you have to take a complete different approach.
Which approach would you suggest for used gear?
First, accident analysis. It's the most important. You have 100,000 tests in reality, or even millions worldwide. And when you collect the few failures and find the reason for these failures and find the pattern behind it, then you have what you need. And then you can verify it in the laboratory. That was my approach.
Yeah, but if we see, I'd like to go back to the values that were in this one particular webbing. We can see that he found this 30.3 kilonewton sample. This is not an accident. He found this one, and this sample can be predicted by using the other 3 values and calculating 3 sigma of it. So this is my experience, what I see, and I think it's not a coincidence that we see this value happening as predicted from the 3 sigma of the other values.
But so, it's a coincidence if you find it or not.
Sure, but the more samples you test, this is what I will talk. The more samples you test, the more of the low value samples you will find. It will just randomly.
Yeah, but testing only from one batch, 3 samples, probability is low. So in testing new things and standardization, you have more to focus on the production quality.
Sure.
And your internal sample. That's why in standards there are more rules for your internal how many batches and how to find the right samples for the internal testing than in standardization. You understand?
Sure.
Yeah.
And Stephan, are you sure that it's not coincidence? Like, for me, it's totally coincidence. Like 3-4 samples, it's like it means nothing. Like it's really nothing. Maybe you will have the same value, the same low value like that for like I don't know 1,000,000 sample or 100 or maybe every 10 sample. You can't predict that. It's just probability and like it's if you have 1% chance or even like 1 on 1,000,000 chance, it's the same. You do three samples and you have the same, like you can have the chance to have it. You don't know about that. You can't say anything. It's also, for me, it's also coincidence that if you take 3 other values that you have that 12-ish, it's it's only coincidence for me, but I don't know if other people think the same. And
yeah, Thomas.
Yeah. So thanks, Stephan, for the talk. So I think there's lots of studies when you go online on people trying to figure out how to calculate the MBS with low sample values. There's different ways to do that. At the end of the day, I kind of support a bit Laurent's view on this. So the chances that that this calculation makes sense are, in my opinion, very small. You really have to, like, sample size does matter. And I think what is even more important, when you have large variances in your measurements, I have to ask yourself, are you actually comparing like apples to pears? Are you really measuring the same thing? Or are you really like just measuring different things, and that's what makes your variance go big in small sample sizes? So the best example is a used webbing, what Philip described, like the area where everybody falls, to where the weblock is, to like some other piece. So this variance will just keep on growing and getting bigger and bigger. And it's then just probably not the right way to estimate the minimum anymore if you have small sample sizes. I mean, we try to do like lots of measurements on one single piece of webbing, and we calculated the MBS, and we got, still some decent small variances in there. So like what I remember from looking at lots of tests from the UIA, the larger the variances are in what they measured, the more they questioned what they're testing and how they are testing. So this should be really in mind if you look at small sample sizes. Are you really comparing the same thing, or are we talking about different things that you would have to even take apart? So I think the 3 sigma, as far as I understood it, it also came out of the fact that it was mentioned in the standard that a manufacturer has to deliver like a safe product, and he had to find a way to define that word safe, right? And in this case, it was DMM who proposed this 3 sigma MBS and started applying this to have like some traceable way of stating their MBSs on a product. And then this is now we're talking about new slings. So we're not talking about variances in used products, where obviously the variance will grow the longer you use it. Let's say along a webbing or so. But I think there is a point where you're not comparing apples and apples, but you're comparing apples and pears. And this is a very sensitive topic. I think every test has to be looked at in this way. Like, why was this 13 kilonewton value from Ryan? Why did that happen? You know, what's the exact reason behind it? We don't really know. It could be a testing variance. You know, it could be a bit another speed, a bit another angle of the weblock. It could be so many different things. We just don't know.
I totally agree.
That's just, it almost gets into a philosophical question, right? You cannot like put this down in numbers anymore.
Yeah.
Just like ask what is reasonable at the end. And I think
I totally agree. There's a way. Let me put it this way: 3 sigma is not only used in statistical processes in gear manufacturing. 3 sigma is, for example, also used in the investment industry.